Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. If you like all things true crime, if you like it delivered in a peaceful, tranquil manner, if you like it clear and concise without drama, then I highly recommend you subscribe. And if you like what you hear, please smash the like button. It's a free way you can help. And now, without further ado, let's dig in. First, let me tell you that the body that was found in the Cumberland River was not Sebastian, thank God. The person who was in the river has been identified as 48-year-old Toby James Douglas. That's all I know about him right now. I wanted to get that out there pronto. It's been 100 days since 15-year-old Sebastian Rogers disappeared from his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. The police say there are still no credible leads. The TBI, FBI, and Sumner County Sheriff are all saying that the case is not cold and remains active. In the absence of new information, the authorities are going back over everything they've done, trying to give it all a new set of eyes. And they say that all of the parents continue to cooperate. That comes from the Sumner County Chief Deputy Eric Craddock. Sebastian's biological father, Seth Rogers, said in a recent interview that his ex-wife, Katie Proudfoot, suffered from alcohol abuse when they were living in San Diego. I've been thinking about that, and I wonder if she is still in the throes of that alleged addiction or substance abuse. I'm wondering if when Katie heard the thud, the one that she said in some interviews, not all, occurred at 10 p.m., did something befall Sebastian, perhaps in his bedroom, that led to a traumatic injury, perhaps to his head, where he suffered from an area of fluid that, if hit, could be fatal? Or perhaps did he suffer some other fatal accident? Could Katie have inflicted some sort of injury on him? If Katie was intoxicated that night, might she have not wanted to dial 911 for fear of getting charged in some way for failing to watch over her minor child? If Sebastian was seriously injured, would Katie have feared legal repercussions? Did she maybe call her husband, Chris Proudfoot, for advice? Could he have said, "You can't call the cops because that will end up screwing up my custody case and it could lead to more CPS reports"? Or if Katie was intoxicated, did she not want to call the cops because they would come over, they would see or smell alcohol, test her, see what her level of intoxication was, and perhaps charge her if Sebastian was indeed injured? Chris Proudfoot, from what I understand, is intent on gaining greater custody of his 6-year-old daughter, Faith, with his fourth wife, Nina Gomez. Could he have told Katie that he didn't want additional trouble with the law, with CPS, or anything else to mess up his custody fight? I do feel Katie had some attachment to Sebastian. We've seen interviews where she's crying. We've heard interviews where she sounds like she's crying in the background. Seth said that when he arrived at the Proudfoot home, after being notified that Sebastian was missing, found Katie crying on the couch, and she was the only one in the house that seemed to be grieving something. It sounds like those tears were authentic, and if they were, was she indeed grieving a loss, the loss of her child, the permanent loss of her child? To cry without searching, without going on TV and social media right out of the gate, to ask people to keep an eye out for Sebastian, to speak directly to Sebastian in hopes he could hear you, could mean that Katie knew there was no hope for her son. To me, she hasn't come across as hopeful that Sebastian will be found. Could she and Chris Proudfoot have decided that to lie and say Sebastian left the house was a better way to go than calling the authorities and admitting to an accident, be it a fatal head injury from a fall, too much sleep medication, or Katie perhaps losing her temper with Sebastian and maybe hitting him in the head in that delicate region and causing a fatal injury? It turns out it's only Chris and Katie who insist that Sebastian walked out the front door without his shoes, without his phone, in the darkness of night when it was cold outside in February. Law enforcement has said that there's no evidence of Sebastian leaving the home. Now, this is pure speculation, but here's why I'm kicking all of this around. One, Katie does sound tearful and sad in some interviews, and Seth did say she was crying that Monday when he arrived at the Proudfoot home. This hints at some degree of emotional attachment to her son. Two, Chris Proudfoot, unlike Katie Proudfoot, does not seem to have an emotional attachment to Sebastian. Chris seems only to want his daughter Faith living in his home. Per both Seth and Chris, the two of them were arranging for Sebastian to go and live with Seth. We've also heard from Seth that Sebastian, with his chromosome deletion syndrome, may need lifelong care, may never become an independent adult. Do you think Chris Proudfoot would have wanted to deal with that for a lifetime? I don't. So to Chris Proudfoot, Sebastian may very well have been expendable. But again, I'm saying this is pure speculation. Nobody's been charged with any crimes. I talk primarily of Chris and Katie being suspects because Seth Rogers has an alibi. He was working in a correctional institute, which captured him on multiple cameras when Sebastian went missing, according to the Proudfoots. So he's out of the picture, at least in my mind. I can't decide if I think Sebastian's disappearance was planned or if it was down to something else. Like I said, perhaps an accident in the house, or perhaps him being locked out of the house as a punishment, and then either truly vanishing or ending up hurt somewhere and deceased outside. In one interview, Katie said she took off driving to look for Sebastian near Beach High School, and she said, "But he was already." And then she clearly stops herself from continuing. She pauses and then redirects to say that the he she was referring to is suddenly Chris Proudfoot. Everything I've learned about the Proudfoots and everything I've witnessed in their behavior and the things they've said, all these things lead me to believe that they know what happened to Sebastian and where he is. Just my opinion, based on all that I've seen and heard and learned about them, about Sebastian, and about his disappearance. After hearing law enforcement say there's no evidence that Sebastian ever left the home, I wondered if maybe he has been hidden right under everyone's noses, as in, is he inside that house or somewhere on that property? It was dark, though, when Sebastian supposedly went missing. If a vehicle had its lights off, could that vehicle have driven away from the Proudfoot home undetected by nearby ring cameras and other security cameras? Or could Katie have handed off Sebastian when she drove around prior to having Chris call the sheriff's office? Is that possible? Maybe. Could a handoff of a live or deceased Sebastian have occurred without anybody seeing it? Back to the home, could Sebastian be somehow sealed in something that would escape the noses of cadaver dogs? I read that dogs can detect the scent of death within minutes of someone dying or many years later. I also read that a well-trained cadaver dog almost never gets it wrong, and their accuracy rate is about 95%. But again, they have to be properly trained. I also read that whether someone is encased inside a concrete block or a pile of ashes, a well-trained cadaver dog can smell the chemicals of decomposition with incredible accuracy. The more I learn about cadaver dogs, I think cemeteries are the best places to hide a body. Seriously. I know that's a crazy thing to say. Could a cadaver dog detect the scent of a specific person who recently died and is buried in a cemetery where there are all sorts of deceased people? Like if they have a person's shoe, could a canine find that person among all these other deceased people. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sorry, but I don't have the answer to that. That's a question I'd like to ask Jules, the canine expert. Knowing that a dog can detect a body under concrete, I don't think that Sebastian is still in the Proudfoot home. I don't think he's on the property anywhere either. Someone left me a comment saying perhaps somebody could have traveled to the swamps of Mississippi where they have alligators, which I'll admit is a disturbing thought, and I did hear Chris Proudfoot say that he had traveled to Mississippi for work and to search. As I wrestle with all of those notions, I also wonder about that scent trail that 3 canines supposedly all tracked to the retention pond in that neighboring construction area. I don't know if all 3 of those dogs were trained the same. I don't know if they're all considered well-trained. But if they were all well-trained and if they were all accurate, how do we incorporate that into our theory about Sebastian's disappearance? Was that actually Sebastian walking or perhaps running to the pond on Sunday night or early Monday morning? Or could that scent have been planted by someone else who made the journey down to the retention pond, carrying maybe Sebastian's shoe or another of his belongings? And did that item get thrown in the pond? And is that why the one dog, Max, jumped into the gross water? Is that even possible for one person to create a scent trail using an item belonging to the missing person? Is that too elaborate a scheme for a perpetrator to pull off without being captured on any cameras, Ring or other security cameras? What do you guys think? Is this a ridiculous idea? Is it too labor intensive? I mean, how could someone even do that and not be witnessed in any way? Or is this whole case down to the most logical answer, and that is that Sebastian did go out the door, and perhaps he was abducted, or he went out the door, ran into some trouble, whether it was weather-related or other, and he succumbed to the elements, but then his body would have been found by now. Or is he stuck somewhere in a chimney or some other structure? I want to take back the wording, the most logical answer, because I don't think it's the most logical answer that he walked out the door. I also re-listened to some of Katie Proudfoot's interviews to see if there were inconsistencies. I think that we know there are some inconsistencies, which certainly make her look suspicious because we know the truth never changes. I also started re-listening to the interview that Nina Gomez did. It wasn't really an interview, it was her sharing her story of getting married to Chris Proudfoot, getting pregnant, having a child with him, how he treated her 2 other children. I didn't get far into it because I got tired last night. This was all going down. But what stuck out in my mind is how she emphasized how strict Chris was with her children, including her 3-year-old son. I don't know what the 3-year-old did, but Chris was doing something to him to say, he needs to become a man. You need to turn him into a man. And she's like, he's only 3 years old. So think about Sebastian and the things we've heard that Chris Proudfoot allegedly did to him, using a belt on him, using his power washer on him. And we know that there are 2 CPS reports, one for Sebastian and one for Faith. It's not normal to get CPS reports. Those 2 reports are red flags. How do you guys reconcile the scent trail to the retention pond? Do you think Sebastian ran there? Is that an absolute activity that took place sometime Sunday night into Monday morning? Is that why those 3 dogs hit on that scent trail? And if so, where do we take the theory from there? If we can say that really happened, then what? The story is that the scent ended at that retention pond. To me, that spells Sebastian either being taken or getting into a vehicle. Or again, could somebody have created a false scent trail? Leave me your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. And yes, I'm working on other cases, and I hope to bring you other stories soon.